We are back for another Ex-Homeschoolers Club. I'm, of course, your host, Jacob Gooden. And I'm continuing on this theme of interviewing parents. And so this week, I'm stoked. My dad is here with me, and we're going to have a good time. We're going to talk about just kind of his involvement in my homeschool childhood and what he's doing today, the growth that we've seen, and just kind of chat about like our relationship and how it's kind of evolved over the years. So, Dad, thanks for coming
Hey,
on.
hey, well, thanks for inviting me to your forum. So it's
I'm
an
so stoked to have you.
honor.
It's like I knew from starting that I was gonna want to interview you and Mom, and I'm glad that you guys are brave enough to put your stories out on the internet, because that's not for everybody.
So,
But
anyways, well, no, I'm
okay,
I'm I'm glad to be a part of this. I don't know. I just it's and I think it's I appreciate what you're doing, and I've been pleasantly surprised at your podcast and um it's so I'm happy to be a part of it.
awesome. Well, thank you. And okay, so let's kick things off. Okay,
Yeah,
so I chatted with Mom. We talked a little bit about like the beginning of the homeschool years, and you were, I don't want to say like not involved, but you were definitely not, you were not a part of really the curriculum aspect. You were very much like principal. You went to work in the morning, you were there for discipline, that kind of a thing, but you were very like hands off of the homeschool situation. But then by the
yeah,
time I was leaving high school, you were very much like in it. I mean, things changed. You were working from home then, but also you were like quote unquote like my teacher. You were the person I reported to when it came to a lot of things. And so I kind of wanted to, talk about like what really changed. And so like, what was that pivotal moment of like going from, okay, I'm not as much involved to like, okay, I think I want to be heavily more involved in this.
right. So initially, like you said, initially I was when your mom was like, "Oh, I think I want to homeschool the kids." I was like, "Fine, do whatever you want. Don't expect me to be involved at all." And I literally, like I said that, and I was just like, "I'm not gonna have anything to do with this. But if you want to do it, go for it. But it's all you, right?" And so and it wasn't that I was opposed to it, it just that I was like, I'm not in at all. I like just count me out. And what I saw was within the first year, I could see the difference in the way that you guys, you and Madison, just interacted with people. I could see it. Like I could just, at that time we were, we were teaching Sunday school. We had, you know, you and how you were with, you know, you and Madison were in comparison to other kids, not to, you know, not to try and like you shouldn't really compare per se, but like at that time, I could see a difference.
Yeah, when you say like a difference, are you talking about like we were more socially like able to talk with like adults, or like what do you mean by like a difference? I guess is
I could see a difference. Yeah, like I think um, I could see it. One of the differences I could see was that you guys weren't afraid to talk with adults. Like you weren't as scared or as shy as other kids.
okay.
And you seemed to be more comfortable with who you were and what you knew and how to express yourselves. Um, so I could see that difference, right? And so it was, and then and then one of the biggest things that helped continue to grow me and my support for homeschooling was, um, was your mom inviting me to a conference, right? One of the first conferences that we weren't went to was like in Ontario, and we were able to drive. They were all in the state of California, but so we could drive, and then we got a hotel and we spent a couple of nights because it was like a 2-day conference or something. And at that conference, I saw other homeschool dads speaking, involved, and I was listening, right? I listened to what they had to say, and and so like it challenged me, and it inspired me, and it started to draw me out and be like, and God started changing my heart in that way, right? Like I I I wanted to have a heart for my family and my kids, and I did, but like I he started growing that desire and that heart bigger for me, and so that was the path that started it, right? And like you said, I was always like the principal, and I was happy to be that, but as my uh you know as my journey grew, and I learned more about it, and I got more involved, it's like, okay, well, I can do this, and I can push for this, and like, and as I went to more and more of these conferences, and mom invited me in to like help select curriculum and look at curriculum, and I could see the opportunities, like when we went to a conference, and like there was a whole Lego curriculum that was like super exciting for me.
Yeah.
Because I was a Lego guy, you were a Lego guy.
Yeah.
I was like, well, we can connect on this, and like this is awesome, right? Like when
Yeah.
I was in school, that Legos wasn't part of curriculum at all, and we could make Lego part of the curriculum, and I was like, yeah. Um, so so seeing things like that, and seeing things like cool stuff that boys like, knives and axes and night stuff, and that stuff that spoke to me, and I thought could speak to you, and as my son, and other things. And so that's where my heart really started to change, and really see, okay, um, I want to not only just support it, I want to really be a champion of it.
Yeah.
Like, not just be like, oh yeah, do this, it's okay, but really like, well, this is really a good thing. This is something we can do as a family, and so that's where I started to see things, and like
Yeah.
in those conferences there were different speakers, um, male speakers that you know challenged me, and like kind of called me out to be a better father, a better husband, and I wanted to meet that challenge, right? I felt like
Yeah.
that was important.
Well, I think something that you and I've talked about this a lot, but it's like I've never felt like, oh, my dad's just like not in my life. If that, like even when we were little kids and I was in public school or even before that, it's like looking back in those memories, it's like you were around, we did stuff, but there was a
Right.
definite shift when you started getting involved in the homeschool stuff where it shifted from dad wants to involve us in the things that he wants to do to dad wants to be involved in the things that I want to do and
Yeah.
find the things that kind of like met in the middle, right? And
Right.
so because like I remember before we lived in Ojai, we like in the condo, I remember like sitting in the garage and like doing woodworking projects and like gluing together like your scrap wood stuff. And like that was fun,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that was your thing. That was what you
Right.
enjoyed and that was how
Right.
you would like de-stress, right? And
Right.
detach, Um not detach, that's the wrong word, but like
Right, right.
that
Just
was your thing. That was
relax
your
and
yeah.
escape, kinda like it was as a form of, and, a hobby
Yeah.
thing.
And when we moved to Ojai, I think the other thing too that's important to point out is that so we moved to Ojai, we moved into a fixer upper house. So that
Yeah.
first year of homeschool, we didn't have a kitchen. We only
Right.
had like one bathroom. So like
Right.
in addition to because I don't want it to come off sounding like you were just like, I'm hands off. I want nothing to do with this. You were
Yeah.
having to work a full time job, then come home and like remodel this house. So
Right.
I think that plays a role in it too, where it's like do I even have the bandwidth to be involved in this? You know,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
that's stressful.
That's true. No, there's some truth in that, and like you're right. Like I was coming home and like changing from my work clothes into my housework clothes, and after dinner I would go to work on the house and until after you kids went to bed and still work and try not to make too much noise, and that's valid.
Yeah,
Um, and so yeah, I we took on a lot.
I guess what
We
I'm
took
trying to
on a
say is like
lot.
our
Yeah,
family
we
just
did
took
take on
on
a lot.
a ton.
That's very true.
Yeah,
And no, but I think um, I wanted to circle back around to kind of where you were saying, like your mom. I'm so thankful for your mom in terms of like even when you guys were young kids, young even babies, right? She encouraged me to be involved in your everyday stuff, give you baths. When I got home, I could have a little nap time with you guys, or play with you before dinner, or and then like give you the bath before bedtime and be a part of that and be so that I wasn't, which was very different than the way I grew up. Okay. So that was and it was very different than, and me being around was a conscious decision because I wanted that because that was different than how, my dad wasn't always around. He was traveling a lot for work during the week. He would be home during the weekends. And then to your point too about, when I was a kid, if I wanted to spend time with my dad, it was like, okay, on the weekends, I'd just kind of like follow him around and be his shadow and be involved with what he was involved with. And like, as I got older, yeah, he like would, I was on a traveling basketball team and he would take me to games and stuff. So he did dip in with that for me, but he was an athlete when he was in high school. So that wasn't like totally out of his wheelhouse. Um, so what I knew was, and kind of what when we were in the condo, it was like, oh yeah, that I just follow me around, enjoy what I do in my hobbies, right? But I had to learn, and part of some of the homeschool conferences helped me learn this, or at least triggered the thinking. Um, you know, I need to enter into your world, and like I can't just expect you to like the things that I like. That may be true in some cases, it may not be true, but if I want to establish rapport with you and relationship, I need to enter into the things that you love and participate in those things. So like that changed, right? Like I tried to, and I wasn't very good. And even when we were working on a house, like you wanted to help me, but I wasn't very good at at instructing you in how to do that, right? That was a
I was gonna
learning
bring
curve
this
for
up. I
me.
was gonna I
I,
was gonna say
you know,
the comparison of like we have this joke of a story that if you pull up the floorboards, I think it's in the living room.
yeah,
If you
it's
pull up
in
the
the living
floorboards in the
room.
living room,
Yeah,
there is just a gigantic paint stain on the concrete thing because
yeah,
I wanted to mix the paint. My dad was like, "Yeah,
yeah,
you can mix the paint. Here's the
yeah,
drill. Here's the big drill bit thing that comes off of it," and then just was like, "Do it." And
yeah,
there was no instruction. And my mom
yeah.
always is like,
I just
I
said,
heard from the other
yeah,
room and I knew it was gonna be a disaster, and sure enough, paint went everywhere. But to
yeah. That's
compare that to then when I think we did it, yeah, when I was in college, to come home and we re-roofed the whole house, and we
right,
worked very much as a team, and there was a lot of communication, and there was
right,
a lot of like, "Okay, let's do this, let's try this." It's very different, right? Like,
right.
there's been this crazy it's just to give both sides of the spectrum, right? It's like the
Yeah.
the lack of
Well,
being able to explain
I've
it.
learned
Yeah.
as a communicator to communicate better,
Mm.
and I've learned that, through home stuff, through work stuff. So so yeah, so I have improved and learned, and it's just like you know, you know, you're you're learning as you go and growing and changing. And I'm not the same person today as I was when we first started homeschooling, and
Right.
so I'm a different person, and I advocate differently. And so, but yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about we started homeschooling like what, 2006, something like that.
uh,
I was 8.
we we bought our house in 2004.
Okay.
So
It's
we started
2005.
the fall of 2004 was when we started.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
because
Why did I do
we
that math wrong? I would have been.
I
I would have been 10 in 2006. Whatever.
so
Um.
no, but that's okay. Like I know because like this we've been here 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And it finally looks like mom's finally driving up to the house and going, oh, it looks great, right?
Yeah.
And she likes the fig tree and the nectarine, the apricot, and like, oh, how the leaves are changing and it looks good with the house, and which is really satisfying, right? But
Yeah.
it's taken 20 years. It takes a
Right.
while, right? It's not an overnight thing. It's not,
I wanted to bring this up too, and this is kind of pivoting a little bit, but
okay.
so you started to get more heavily involved in our education, and I remember like it. I think it really, to some degree, started where at night we would read books together as a family, and you would sit. You started just like sitting in with us. I feel like, and we
Mhm.
were just reading. It was like historical literature, basically,
Right. Yeah.
like fiction,
Giants
historical
Remain
fiction.
Giants
Yeah,
Remain was one of them. Carry On Mr. Bowditch was one of them. I mean, and part of that too, like that was I also remember because I broke my hip and while during during all this period, and I was sitting in the living room and as lazy boy working, and you guys would read, and I would hear these stories, and I'd be like, you know, but I wouldn't get to hear the whole book because you'd like read a couple chapters, and then later when I wasn't around, you'd read more, and I'd jump in later, and I missed part of the story, and I was just like, this is so good, and I ended up reading several of those books myself just because I was like intrigued,
right.
by the story. It was a good story, right?
Yeah, and but I think that's really where like I started seeing you kind of like get involved in like our stuff. And maybe there was more behind the scenes of like you helping mom choose curriculum and things like that, but I definitely felt like when you started being involved in like oh reading a book together and then would talk about it, and
Uh-huh.
then like
Uh-huh.
I mean, you went from being like principal cuz I mean, yeah, up until whenever you broke your hip, which was well, we were
I think you were in
almost
high
in high
school.
school, like, yeah,
Yeah,
freshman maybe,
yeah,
um, freshman, sophomore, something like that. So, yeah, 14, 15. So you're talking about, I mean, that's it's 8, so what, like
yeah,
6 years of time, that like that I feel like was a big transition, one in your life, but also in we saw so much more of you because it went from dad went to work every day, he would come home and yeah, he was involved in like story time and he would go do homeschool stuff. You did homeschool stuff with
right,
us. You come to groups,
right,
do whatever, go to dances with us, that kind of stuff. But that was I think a big transition period too, where it was like all of a sudden dad's around. So he gets
yeah,
to see the inner workings of a day to day.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, I feel like I don't know, like,
Well,
it
part of that, I think part of it too. Okay, so what also brought about some of the transition was when you hit puberty. Um, quite honestly, like,
the best
and
time
you
of
were
life.
right. So like and so when you hit puberty and you were starting to bristle at mom's instruction, right? Which is natural, right? Which is for a young man transitioning from a boy to a young man, that's a natural part of life. And so your mom was like, I really need help. And um, thankfully she was able to express that, and thankfully, I could hear it. And for me, when I was a young man at that stage, I just needed physical activity, right? So hence some of the things that, you know, I would do with you in terms of, you came to my work and swept the whole sidewalks and stuff like that for, punishment and other things. Like I would just have you do labor to help get out some of that extra energy and hormones and everything, because like that's what worked for me as a kid. But also in attending some of the homeschool conferences, there was a particular individual. There was a speaker. He happened to be an executive or a manager at Focus on the Family at the time, and he spoke. And his his session really spoke to me because he was like, I'm I'm in charge of my son's homeschool, right? And how he did it, right? And like, yeah, as they're transitioning from a boy to a young man and drawing them out, and like they take instruction from their fathers better than their mothers, right? And it doesn't mean, and so that really challenged me. And then that, like, seeing this happen with you, like, okay, like I can do this, right? Like he's doing it, he's working a full-time job as a manager executive for this organization. I'm not an executive, and I have a full-time job, but I can do it. We can figure this out, right? And so part of that was like, and it wasn't like I would sit down and do all the, it was a lot of it was your mom would plan the lesson plan and I would just communicate it to you because you could hear it from me better than you could hear it from her, right?
Right.
And it wasn't that I didn't have input, it was just that I, you know you
Well,
know,
yeah, things
it
pivoted during that time because
it yeah,
it went from okay, so yeah, mom is structuring everything to okay, so dad is still going to work. Because
right,
this was pre you working from home, and like dad goes to work, but like I got a laptop, I got my first email address. There
right,
was like, and yeah, we set out a structure and a schedule, and you were like, okay, you email me when you're done with certain things, to say, "Hey, it's done, checked it off the bucket
right,
list," right? And so that way
right,
you knew that it was time to like, okay, I can go and I can grade it, or we can, or it
right,
can, whether it was you or mom grading it, whatever, it was time for the review, and then we'll discuss it and that kind of a thing.
yeah.
Yes, you brought up going to your office. I have both very fond and terrible memories of that place. Um, I Yeah, I was a little shithead, sometimes, and I remember there was this one day, I don't remember what happened, but yeah, I ended up at your office, and the worst job
So
I
the
ever did
so
at your office was clean
So just
the
for the
fridges.
for the listeners, my that was the principal's office, right? And
Yes.
fortunately, I we where I worked was only about 15 minutes away from home, so like I could run home at lunch if things were happening, which happened on multiple occasions, and I could pick you up and bring you back for the rest of the afternoon, and you had to be in the principal's office
Yep.
for the rest of the day,
And when
right?
I say it was brutal because a lot of times it really just meant you passed me off to one of, like, the, not supply room, what am I thinking of? Like, the shipping room guys, I
Yeah,
don't
so
know.
so we had so Dustin was in charge of the shipping, and he was also in charge of the maintenance of the
Right.
building and stuff. And so like when I was done with you in terms of like I had like whatever I could think of you had accomplished, and we're still sitting, there's 2 or 3 hours left of before we're going home. I just go down to Dustin and I go, what jobs do you have that you need help with? Here's hands to help you, right?
Yep. The worst thing I ever did, and if anybody works in a corporate office, you know the disgustingness that is the corporate fridge because everyone forgets that their stuff is in there.
Oh
I
yeah.
scrubbed this thing top to bottom multiple times.
Yep.
Soda, sticky soda residue, ice cream that was like you couldn't even tell it was ice cream anymore, like moldy cheese. Like I have never seen so much mold in my entire life. Like it's no wonder I have an allergy to mold because I mean, we're talking about containers that the mold was that had grown its own ecosystem inside of it, and then it was like coming out of the lids. Like it was disgusting. It was like the worst thing ever. And yeah, you know what's funny, and not to really call out my aunt who worked with you, but my
Yeah,
aunt Bertha
yeah.
who worked with you, if she's listening, I'm calling you out. Her initials are BO, and that was listed on a lot of things that ended up with mold in them. So I threw away a lot of your containers, Aunt Bertha. Yeah, those are just in a
She
landfill
just
somewhere.
the stuff that people bring and then, like, eat partially or don't
Yep.
finish and then, like, leave and forget about it and then
Yep.
bring something else the next day, that's the stuff that you got to clean out, and
Oh
that's the
man, it was
stuff that's
so
gross.
disgusting. Yeah, there was
Yeah.
that. I think that was the worst. I had to do filing that was like super
Yeah.
repetitive and dumb. That
Yeah.
I remember somebody coming through and being like, "Why are you doing this?" And I was like, "Because I'm in trouble." And they're like, "Oh, that makes sense." And I was like, "Do you guys even use these?" And they're like, "No, it's all digital now." Like, like what am I doing? Um, but yeah, so that was
Mm.
yeah, that was punishment a
Yeah.
lot of the times. But yeah, you did like I think it was good that you pushed me to do like physical activity because one of the things too was like yeah, when hormones are raging and just life is changing, it was like there's a
Yeah.
lot of emotion, there's a lot of whatever. And it it got to the point where I just kind of also learned that it's like, okay, if I get frustrated, just go mow the lawn, go wash the car,
Right.
like go do
Right.
something, right? Go throw a
Right.
ball at a wall, like just like
Yeah.
do something and you get out the aggression, the frustration, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And obviously there needs to be a part of like actually exploring what that emotion and where that stemmed from, but sometimes then that emotion just boils up. You just have to like get it out first
Right.
in a physical form,
Well,
and it's a
and
lot
if you
better
can
to,
get it
like,
out in a
punch the lawn with a lawnmower than it is to, like, throw a chair across the room.
right,
So
and if you can get it out in a positive way or, because I know as a kid when I was in school and I was we lived in Minnesota, and so one of the methods that if I get frustrated at school or with a teacher and I get angry, so a positive outlet for that was I could come home and I could split wood because
mhm,
we burned wood. And so splitting wood is physical labor, you're swinging a sledgehammer and using a splitter and stuff like that. And so like but then it also benefited the family because it gave us a wood pile that we could burn during the winter and that was helpful, right?
yep.
So and then like I didn't get in trouble at school because I blew up at a teacher. So, that's something that when I was young, it worked for me. So hopefully I could, pass it
I think
on
it
a little
worked for
bit
me
to
too. I mean,
yeah.
it's still something that, like, it's different now. I don't have a lawn to
Yeah.
mow, but,
Yeah.
it's figuring out those things that it's like, yeah, when you get
Right.
frustrated, it's like, go for a run, go do whatever, to sometimes you
Right.
just gotta get it out, and once it's
Right.
out, then it's like it's a lot easier to deal with it when it's not just, like, in the
Right.
moment
Then
sometimes.
you can yeah, I mean, it takes it down to a level where now all of a sudden I can be critically thinking about it,
Yeah.
you know?
You
To
also, I
me for
think,
me,
as you
yeah.
grow, I think too, you learn to start to recognize the triggers of getting to that point of like,
Yeah.
when you're a hormonal teenager, it's like when people talk about getting mad, right? And they see red. Like I feel like
Right.
there's a level when you're a teenager that's just like it's kind of that, and it's not always anger, but it maybe expresses itself in anger sometimes. But
Mhm.
as you get older, if you listen to it, right, you can start to recognize the trigger. So you start to realize, okay, why am I ramping up to this point of seeing red, right? And so
Right.
before that, you can start to combat it with things that don't involve having to go chop wood, right? And so
Right.
and then you're able to kind of you can diffuse the situation a lot faster, I guess is what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
Yeah. 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 So and then also the other point I was raised about, uh, taking over, being more involved with your schooling as you were older, and like having the office situation, and then and the email. You mentioned the email and stuff, but also like you had to schedule time with me, right? Like that was
Right.
like because because I worked, you had to be intentional about okay, well, I need X amount of time for you, dad, tonight. So don't plan it, well, I have to schedule an appointment with you. So like which was important, which was good because like it helped us, get it done and work on, getting the task done. But also it taught you a skill set um that's beneficial, that's transferable and beneficial for life too, right? Like so now in your work you have schedule and you make appointments all the time, and that's something that you're you started to learn in high school as
Right.
you were working with me, right? So that was another, I think that was, so that was one of the things, um
Well,
I
yeah,
see as
well,
a
that and I mean, even when like later in high school, when I started to kind of have like my own jobs, my own like businesses and things like that, it's like a lot of times you and I would sit down and I'd be like, okay, I have this idea. I want to do this thing, right? Like, how does
right.
this make sense financially,
Yeah,
right? And it's like,
yeah,
or like I used to, I bartered with Tim Franz. It's like I would go be his janitor for a couple hours a week in exchange for music lessons. Great,
right,
it was a one for one kind of a deal, but then I taught my own guitar lessons, I taught my own dance lessons, I did a bunch of other stuff that it was like, okay, like we would sit down and I'd be like, okay, here's kind of what I'm thinking about charging. Is this too much? Is
right,
this not enough? Does this make sense? It's like if I have to drive to Ventura for this, it should be higher, and so you
right,
also sat down with me to kind of look at all these things from just a like, okay, yeah, you have your own business, but like it needs to make sense if you're actually going to do it. And that's been transferable to now I have my own
right,
business.
right. And that's been fun. Like that's been fun for me, right? Because
Mhm.
like I have not been entrepreneurial in my career, but I've been in business and I can help. Like it's been fun for me because like I can help you think through some things that I've learned along the way just being involved with business and see, the transactions and the concerns and what's thought about to help you think about those things as you are entrepreneurial in your endeavors, right? Like,
Right.
okay, consider this, right? These are costs, these are things to think about, right? So
Yeah.
that's been fun for me.
I think too that like this is really looping back also kind of the beginning of the conversation, but
Sure.
you getting involved in things that also I was interested in played a big part in I think us having the relationship that we do today because in talking to like my friends and interviewing people on the show and kind of figuring out, I was like, people have brought up like, Jacob, your parents were around. Like we saw your parent, we saw your dad. We never saw any homeschool dads. Like, well, we saw your
Uh,
dad, and then especially talking to like the guys, it's like I'm realizing like you came in, you would airsoft with us, and you would,
yeah,
we would work on cars together. We would whatever little like, we go roof somebody's house. We go help somebody
right,
move. It's like you did things that I was passionate about with me, specifically airsoft, I think it's the big one.
right.
And
Yeah, which I love too. So like,
what's so funny? And for people who yeah, we brought up you breaking your leg. And what's so funny is you broke your leg paintballing. And I want to
yes,
say that was
yeah.
like one of our first, I don't know that you had airsofted with me prior to that, or maybe once or twice, but you weren't really as much into it
Yeah,
yet,
like
I feel like.
yeah.
I feel like paintball was kind of the first big
Well,
thing
we
we
were
did where it was
I
like, let's
we had
do
our
this.
airsoft stuff before that um, because I remember, like, we had I mean, we had our airsoft stuff before I broke my hip,
Okay. Maybe my
but,
memory is
like,
serving me wrong, but yeah.
yeah, because I remember, like, playing up at the Hall Ranch, which was one of our
Yeah.
places that we would play, and before breaking my hip, right? Like, and then,
Yeah.
like, when I broke my hip, they let me use the Gator to drive around, right?
That's right. I
For one
forgot
of
about that.
them, and then, like, we had the overnight stay thing, we played at night, and then I upped my game and bought, like, really expensive night equipment so that I could, like,
Yeah.
terrorize you guys because I couldn't move around as good, and that
Yeah. Yeah.
was one
I will
okay, so
say
that's one of my favorite memories, right? So, like, so I had a job, I had a
right.
good job, and I could buy so I bought I bought a flashlight that was designed for hunting with the optical, like super powerful to go on the rail of my airsoft gun with the whole pressure switch thing, that I could have right down at the grip level. And all these other, and all these other kids, right, were just like, oh, I'm getting a flashlight from Costco. I'm just going to tape it to my gun, right? And then I'll just click it on, click it off, right? And so, which worked, but like, I was like, well, I know I'm not as mobile, so I gotta up my game, right? So the funnest part was, I remember that night. So David Worth, he had a ghillie suit even, and it was pitch black, and he's wearing his ghillie suit, and I just hear movement, and I light him up, and it's like a deer in the headlights, and he's like, and I hear him go, "Oh crap!" And I could just see the airsoft bullets flying out of my gun, hitting him.
Yeah. I will say,
Airsoft
if
BBs,
there
I
are
should
any
say.
current homeschool kids listening to this, if you want good gear for whatever sport you want to play, get your parent into that sport because they will fund it. We had some of the nicer guns. I mean, we didn't even have
Yeah,
like the craziest stuff, but we had nice guns, we had nice gear. And yeah, and then when you couldn't make it, I got to still take all that stuff. So yeah, then
yeah,
I
you still
had
got to
high
use
powered
the gear.
flashlights and lasers and yeah,
Yeah,
night vision this
yeah.
and all that stuff. So um yeah, no,
So,
I forgot about that flashlight.
yeah, no,
That's crazy.
it was worth it. Um,
Yeah,
so, and the other part too, like, well, I was thinking about this that kind of got me I think got me, well, how you get, got me some cred with your guys was you guys were over at the house playing around, doing whatever, right? And then you guys were like at the kitchen table, like, oh, let's arm wrestle, right? And and especially David Worth and like they're like, oh yeah, and so like, well, I'm like, so I was like, I want in on this, right? And so they're like, David's like, ah, that's his dad who's nothing, right? And so I beat him, and like, and then that got me some cred, I think, with David at least. Um,
yeah, yeah. Well, I think so to kind of go into more of your story too, is that like growing up, like you've always been like a thin, fairly athletic person, but like you
right?
weren't running, you weren't being physically active.
No,
And then when you broke your hip, you really hit this stride of like maybe it's a I don't know, maybe did the doctors say like you might walk with a limp for the rest of your life because like you went into just like I'm gonna be a runner now mode.
yeah, like what happened was, they it was long
Hmm.
recovery. And I mean, I was on crutches for 4 months. Then after crutches, my back was all jacked up because of the change and all the muscular thing, and the pain from my back was worse than the pain from my hip. Um, and then I did PT for at least a month, if not more, and that PT helped me a lot. But then after PT, I'd sit in the office and sit in a chair, and then I'd get up to go to the coffee station or whatever, and I'd start to limp, and then it would work out, right? But I didn't like it. But so basically, it was like, I don't like this.
Right.
So in combination with that, so that was like, I don't want this. So then that I was like, I have to do PT like every day, and not just like, oh, I did my 2 months of PT and I'm good and I can just live my life how I want. I realized that because of my back, because of my leg, I have to consistently do this. And so that changed a lot of things in my life. And then with the cancer diagnosis not too long after the hip thing, um, uh, that also changed how I viewed my health and the importance of that. And so then, I really was, you know, um, trying to be more intentional about that, and just be as strong and ready for anything as I could be.
Yeah.
And that's so that. that that
Well, we
changed that changed the
yeah.
dynamics.
Well, we talked about,
Um,
like, getting mad, right, and doing something
yeah,
productive, right? And it's like, I remember, yeah, when you got diagnosed with cancer, it was like, e it was a shock, first of all, to all of us, but then it was you kind of I think a lot of people would go more into a depressive state of just kinda being like, "Okay, it's over." Like, I don't know, like, and even though to give a little bit of context, you have CLL, which is chronic
right,
lymphatic leukemia.
right,
You're stage 0, 1
right.
kind of
I'm
level,
I'm
so
stage
it basically
0.
right,
Yeah, I
it's like a
haven't had.
non-existence, but it's one of those cancers where if it activates, it's, like, really fast, right?
Right, well, I don't know if it's fast, but it's a blood cancer, and it's inert right now. Like, I've never had treatment. I'm just it'll be 11 years this year, since I was diagnosed, and I think part of that. So to go along with that, part of it, like, so when I broke my hip, um, part of my recovery was at that time. So I broke my hip in 2011 is when I broke my hip. And so part of that was the year that that they found Osama bin Laden, and they brought him to justice, basically. Um, which means they killed him. So, but but um, so so at that time, so the Navy SEALs is a big deal, right? And so, like, so I was so part of my thing, and there was all these stories and books about Navy SEALs, and I got into reading a lot of stories and books about Navy SEALs. But part of it was like I realized that, okay, in order to recover, and then also with the cancer diagnosis, just like 3 years, like two years later, I realized that I needed a mindset like that of an elite warrior, right?
Mhm.
And so in reading those books and in reading about those types of warriors, I needed to have that kind of mindset to address the things that I needed to overcome, right? Like what I had to overcome was, so in reading these books, it was like what I had to overcome was like nothing compared to what these guys had to overcome in their life. So it was like, well, I can do this because they did this, and it was far
Right.
greater than anything I have to do. But so that helped me, in that mindset. I guess is it was a more of a mindset thing for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I just remember, like, you would get angry. I mean, you weren't an angry person, but, like, when you got diagnosed with cancer, it's like you could tell there was a shift in your personality of just I think you were just kind of you were just figuring out what to do with that information, right?
right, right,
And I remember, yeah, you just started going running and it would be like 2 hours. Like, in my head, I was like, my dad is Forrest Gump at this point because he would just be gone. Like, you would just go running for hours, and then come back. And yeah, and then you started kind of like, in addition to running, you were like, okay, I'm gonna do like push-ups and pull-ups and like all this body weight
yeah,
stuff. And you did
yeah,
like, and then it's evolved over time. And now you do, not always competitive, but you do like obstacle course racing and a lot
right,
of like mud run type stuff. And
right,
you're really good at it. You're, like, top of your class for your age range, and, like, it's it's insane because I think for me, it's crazy to watch because, like, I have always thought my dad's in great shape. He's fit, he's athletic, he can lift stuff, he can do whatever. We play basketball, whatever.
right,
He's good. And then, 2013-ish, and even a little bit before that, but you just, like, all of a sudden, it was, like, complete change of just, like, I'm gonna be super athletic. And to your point, you went, I have to have this mindset that's different. I want to be
right,
the best version of myself.
right,
Um, and how do I do that? Well,
right.
here's what I do, And so
Yeah,
I applaud you for that because it's not easy. It's not easy to do that. It's a lot
right.
easier to just kind of be like, well, I guess this is life now, right? And just like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm
Yeah,
always
I
gonna
mean,
have a
it's a
limp
struggle.
and I'm
Like,
gonna have cancer and I'm just not gonna change anything. It's just, I'm just gonna do life as it is and see what happens. But you
yeah,
didn't
I
do
mean,
that.
no, it's 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 a struggle, and, like, part of, I really like you mentioned obstacle course racing, and I really enjoy that, as you know, and I it's kind of my hobby, and but I kind of look at it as like it was it's been super helpful along the way because because it helps me, it gives me, I can look back at it when I have other challenging things in life, whether it's at work or in my personal life or whatever, and I could say, okay, well, I did this thing, so I can make it through this thing, right?
Right.
And there's a saying called it's a well, it's attributed to Marcus Aquilas, I think. The obstacle is the way, right? So like it's not so the obstacle is your way, and it's like getting through the obstacle, not avoiding the obstacle, but finding a way through and over through the obstacle. So so I use that as, so doing obstacle course racing, I use it as like, okay, so like I can do these obstacles, and so when I run across the obstacle in life, I figure it out and I can make my way through the obstacle, whether it's an obstacle at work or an obstacle in my personal life or something. It's like it's encouragement for me to push through that, to figure out a way to get through that obstacle, right?
Yeah. No, and I think that's
Um,
that's like so important and like it's been inspiring for me when I have stuff in my life that's tough. It's like, okay, well, my dad could do this, I can do this, and
yeah,
it's like
yeah, yeah,
it's like
right.
um,
The old
you
man
know,
can do it. I can do it.
exactly. I'm like, yeah, he's way older than I am. I should be able to do this. And so it pushes me to want to be that better version. And everybody's different, right? But it's like I have
Right.
those own obstacles in my life that I go, okay, I can get there. It's just time sometimes. It's just,
Yeah.
I I constantly live by the thing of like, how do you eat an elephant?
Hmm.
Well, it's just one bite at a time. And so it always just feels like there's a mountain of stuff, but
Right.
it's just that small step in the right direction every single day.
Right.
And we get to choose that for ourselves. So I think that that's really important. And, you know, um, yeah, and I got to see you run in the first race I got to see you run. You came here to Tennessee, get to
Right.
go. It was super cool. I don't know
It
that
was
I'll ever
fun.
do that. It's kind
It's
of a
fine.
pipe dream, but who
Yeah.
knows? We'll see. Maybe
Hey,
someday. But it's
I'm
insane,
so,
people.
yeah. Well, I'm working on James.
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta work on my cousin, see if he'll do it. I think
Yeah.
he'd do it. So
Actually, he's like, 'cause, well, yeah, he's kinda interested, right? 'Cause
yeah,
he's been working out a lot where he's at, so,
good.
anyways.
So I was gonna say, and we kind of touched on this already, but
Uh-huh.
coming out of the homeschool years, so I graduated in 2014. Madison graduated, I think, 2017,
Yeah,
2016, 2016, 2017, something like that.
2017, I believe it was.
Um, so, that was probably less of a pivot for you, but definitely a change in you and mom's life. So,
Right.
was that hard for you, or like, did it feel empty after that, or were you just like, I'm thankful I have like some time again?
Um,
or
it was, I mean, it was a bigger change for your mom, clearly, because she was more heavily involved. But I mean, with Madison, you know, the high school years, I was the math science guy in the high school years. Your mom was like, "Well, you're grading all the math science stuff because that's your realm," and she's the English writing literature person, which, I'm happy to have that be her realm. And I think it was easier for me because I had work, you know.
Mhm.
I didn't like um it wasn't everything for me, and not to say that
Right.
it was everything for your mom, but it was a big part of
Right.
of her identity as well, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't completely who she was, she's her own person, but it was a big part of what she had poured many, many years into.
Yeah.
And I was involved with that, but at the same time, I had my work that gave me, part of my identity as well. And then I was doing racing at that still and stuff.
Right.
So, it was good. Like, I mean, it was, so one of the things that changed is, so those homeschool relationships that were it was such a natural interaction and interface, and those kind of changed because that interface and those natural overlapping of your lives changes, right? It becomes less.
Yeah.
So some of those relationships are, I've had to be more intentional about keeping some of those relationships up. Some of those relationships have not are not as robust as they once were. Your mom's been better at keeping those relationships up amongst her group of ladies, which was a very good thing, right? That she had book clubs that she was still participating in. They still did, you know, Fridays at the beach.
Right.
Okay, we don't have kids now, but we're still going to the beach, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is good, which was super healthy. I mean, that's
Yeah.
super healthy, and like, so that's been good. I think the part where, and as you know, like we were involved with the Achieve board, um, and so even after we graduated, our students, we were still on the board. It was hard to get people on the board. It was hard to get people engaged to want to volunteer. They kept us on. Your mom was ready to be done. Like, she wanted to be done. And it was kind of interesting because I was like more like, oh, this is good. I want to advocate for this. I want to be
Right.
like, I feel like I have more room to advocate for this now,
Right.
right? And your mom was just like, I'm done. I'm tired. I'm ready to be done. And
Yeah.
I was like getting my second wind and just be like, well, we have to advocate and we have to support and we have to be encouraged, right? Our role changes, right? We're not schooling, we're not doing it, but we can be advocates, right? Um so that was a little bit different, right? That's kind of shocking, right? Like
Yeah.
like here I go from this guy who's like, do whatever you want, I'm not going to be involved at all, to like, well, we can stay on the board a little bit longer. Like, we need
Yeah.
to be advocates. And your mom's just like, I'm done. Like, let's be done. Right.
Right. Right.
And
She had
so,
hit that. I mean, she had what, 12, 13 years at that point
yeah,
of just like,
she had hit her fill. And like,
yeah.
for me, like, I clearly, like, I wasn't as involved, right? I was involved, but like, so I hadn't, you know, I was getting a drip, she was getting, the whole spigot on. And so I was, still had energy and desire, and felt, oh, well, now's my time to be a bit more of an advocate, and we can play a different role, right? Like more of
Right.
a consulting role, or um, coaching kind of a role.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. So that was different. I mean, we're completely off now, but
Yeah.
I would say, what I also have found, um, I would say that I still am an advocate.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, even just in September when we were down in Anaheim for my race at Angel Stadium, we spent the night and I went to the jacuzzi to relax. There was a couple in there and they were talking about school and their kids, and I just was like, "Oh, are you guys teachers?" And they're like, "No, we're just concerned parents." And so we got to talking about, homeschooling, and I was just like, "Oh, well, it's just like, well, it's good that you're involved, like, you're engaged, whether you're homeschooling or whether your kids are traditional school or whether they're private school or however, it's really good to hear that you're so engaged with your students, with your kids, right? And you were trying to advocate for other students that were in the classroom with their students where they would saw that they needed, you know, services, different types of services.
Right.
So that was, so that's, so I'm advocating for parents really.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
and
I think that that's something that, a lot of people believe, right, that people homeschool their kids like strictly for like religious reasons, or strictly because, they're like
Right.
doomsday preppers and they're like, I don't want the government anywhere near my kids' education,
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? That was maybe more of an 80s and 90s thing. But I mean, maybe it's going to be a
No, but
thing
I mean,
again
it's
today. But
legit.
like,
Right.
the, and I think, and mom's going to speak more to this when we chat, but it's just like, I think you guys did it more from a place of like, we want what's best for our kids and their education.
Right.
And what is that, right? Is it
Right.
because I think if private school had been the thing, you would have been like, okay, then private school's the thing. If
Right.
public school was working, then yeah, public school would have been the thing. And it
Right.
just was, homeschool ended up being that thing that was best. And there's obviously always things that can be done better, but that's life, that's
Right.
parenting.
Right.
So,
So yeah, so that's why I say I'm an advocate for parents. Like
yeah,
I and like I homeschooling clearly worked for us. I see homeschooling as a highly uh customized education.
yeah,
You're able to meet identify and meet the needs of your students, your kids, and specifically address them on a very customized basis. Um, and so, in other situations, in other scenarios, they're not able to do that. In public school, it's a volume thing. There's a lot of students there, but that doesn't mean that you still can't advocate and be the best and engaged with your student and help them. As if you know what's going on, you're following their homework, you're engaged in what they're doing, like, because I have friends, Zach and Diane, him and his wife, they homeschool their kids, but they like homeschooled them for a few years in grade school, then they kind of went back to school, then they homeschooled them again, and they went back to high school. So and part of it is their kids in high school wanted to participate in sports, so that was important to them. But as parents, they were highly involved. They were sports parents. They were always there. They were helped them navigate those waters, uh, you know,
right.
emotionally through, how whatever those challenges were that they're addressing in those situations. They just didn't like throw them in there and just say, well, it's the public school system's deal. No, there are kids. We care about them. We want them to have the best education they have, and we're going to be involved to make sure that we're involved with that education, regardless of what it is, and that we can help them think through things and give them skills, to do that. You know,
Yeah.
whether they get them in school or we supplement what they get in school, or however that looks,
Yeah.
that's the important thing, I think. you
Yeah.
know
No, and I 100% agree with you because that's what I'm realizing talking to people is like,
um,
especially people my age are starting we're starting to become parents. People my age are starting to have
right.
kids, multiple of
Right.
them, and they're going, okay, do I homeschool? Do I do this? Do I do the other? And I'm seeing what I see is a lot of them going, I just want my kid to have the best thing possible. So
Right.
I have to figure out what that is. And for some people, they
Right.
go, my education sucked. So for me, teaching is just not an option.
Right.
Great. That's fine. You recognize that within yourself. But to your point, they're going to be there for every sports game. They're going to be there when, if the kid is struggling in a class, they're going to be there for that kid to be like, okay, well, what is it? We got to work
Right.
with you. And I
Right.
think we're coming out of there's this argument to be made that there is a generation of people who had children as an accessory rather than as like because they actually wanted to have children. And
Mm,
that generation of people, they really wanted they complain about the education system, but they also have nothing to do with fixing it.
mm.
They just want it fixed, but they don't want to actually advocate or they don't want to pick up a pinky to actually
Right,
help fix it, right? And I
right.
think so hopefully we're coming out of that now into more of a generation of people who go, no, I in addition to advocating for my kid and seeing the problems that exist inside of the schooling system as it sits in the US,
I wanna be
I
involved.
want to be involved and I
Yeah.
want to figure out what that means to help, because
Yeah.
that's when it comes to public, private, like that, teachers
Well,
need help,
even in the homeschool realm, there's that's important too, right?
Right,
Like having the volunteers that are on the committees for like an Achieve organization that we were a part of, right?
right.
Like, okay, well, how can how do you help mold and guide this organization to meet the needs of the parents that are now involved in it, right? And
Yep.
we need those people, right? And we need that engagement. It's not a magic bullet like, oh, I'm just going to homeschool my kids and it's all going to be, you know, you know, unicorns and roses. We still have to address things, like how so I still have to, need I need, like I don't know, there's resources that I think are helpful and to get
Yeah.
involved with those resources so that you can best utilize them, best benefit from them, but also give back to them.
Yeah.
Um,
I was gonna kind of not end with this, but I do
but
want to ask this question of parents is and for you, it's a twofold question. So
okay.
the first part of the question is gonna be for parents who are thinking about homeschooling their kids, what is like the one piece of advice you would give them of just like whether it's like think about this thing that maybe they're not thinking about, um, or I would have done this differently, or whatever that might be. And then the second tier to this question, the second part of this question is specifically for dads who are about to be homeschool fathers. And I think this goes more for just dads in general. What
Uh-huh.
is like one piece of advice you would give them to be a better father? So take that as you will.
So for parents, okay, so for parents in general, um I think um, one of the things that comes to mind is it is it is you can think outside the box, right? Like it doesn't have to look like traditional school. Don't get caught up in the I want to homeschool my kids, but it has to look like this, right? And I think like initially that was one of our things that we struggled with because both your mom and I had used the becca curriculum, the becca, not that it's not a good curriculum, the becca curriculum in private schools that we both had attended, and we liked it and it worked well. And so when we first homeschool we picked that, but then that didn't work well in our homeschool setting. We felt like we had to do these certain standards or pick a whole curriculum, right? Then we learned that, oh, well, we can cobble this together however we want. We can pick this over here. We like this better over here. It doesn't have to be one unified curriculum. Now, some people, maybe that works better for some people. For us, it didn't work. So, like, I would just encourage to like we were for well I know for me I was a little bit stuck in that box initially, but after at the end, like you and I, we did history by watching World War II history movies or war movies, right? That was one of the
Yeah.
ways we did history.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. That was kind of cool, and there was things to be learned from that. And then there was also ways that we took books, and we took current books that were controversial, um, uh, one of them was
The Da
uh,
Vinci Code.
the Da Vinci Code, and we
Yeah.
read it together and we discussed it, right? And it was
Yeah.
controversial in our circles, and
Right.
but we weren't as like, don't be scared to take that on and like bring a and open up the discussion about, well, what do you see and what are these characters like, and what does this really mean, and why are people like up at, why is this controversial, right? Like,
Right.
and
Especially
so
the Vinci Code, because I mean, it says in literally the first page of the book, this is a work of fiction.
right,
So
right.
yeah.
This is a novel. This isn't, you know, but part of it is like the way the author sketches the characters, right? The
Exactly.
main character is a expert in his field, and so
Right.
so he writes him as an expert. Well, and he talks like an expert, but then people like just think of it as like, well, that's an expert. Well, it's a character. It's a novel. He can write whatever he
Yeah.
wants, right?
Yeah.
Like, and the thing, and I think, and one of the things that I like about that, like, I like that we could take those books and we could discuss the ideas and we could talk about, well, he's drawing these ideas from this painting of the Last Supper that was done by Da Vinci, who lived how many hundreds of years after the First Supper even occurred. So the painter, in and of itself, is doing a depiction of something that he didn't see
Right.
firsthand, and yet we're drawing all these, the character in the novel is drawing all these conclusions about the life of Christ from this picture that was in and of itself an interpretation of something that he didn't firsthand witness. And so, like, I don't know, like, so that we could talk about
Right.
those things. Like,
Right.
um,
We applied the thing is we applied logic to things and arguments that people were making around these tough topics that it's like,
right,
yeah, books came out all the time that it was just like,
right,
especially, yeah, growing up in the church, it's like, really, people would just be up in arms over these things. And then when you really break it down, you go, okay, they don't like this because they just don't like the way it portrays Jesus, right?
right,
Even though it's a work of fiction, it's not
fiction,
real.
right,
Most people, the average person is not reading this and believing that this is true. It's really only people inside of the church who are putting this perception that anybody who's not a Christian is reading this and going thinking they understand the life of Christ. It's like,
right,
well, I don't think anybody was really doing that. It's possible. There's always a possibility, but I don't
right.
think people were really doing that. But we sat and had conversation around it to be like, this is kind of dumb,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, and like, it's just like any other book, but like we read historical books like Giant Termaine and Carry On Mr. Bodovich, and those are novels too.
right?
And it's not to say that the stuff in those books are true. They're not true. It's a story, but it's a story of the time. So it's basically giving you an illustration of what the period was like, and
Yeah,
that's how we use them, right?
yeah.
It's a good
I mean, the same
story
with,
that
yeah, the
gives
same
you
with
an
watching all the
idea of the
war
period.
movies. Yeah, the
Yeah,
same with watching
it's
all
a
the war movies we
movie,
did. It's a movie. We would watch
right,
Saving Private Ryan, but then we would also read, a firsthand account, or we would do
right,
research on what actually happened and things like that, right? And
right.
I
So it's
think,
like, yeah, this is an illustration of something, a visual illustration through a movie, but it's telling a story.
right,
It's not necessarily factual. It's just that it gives you a flavor. It's trying to give you a flavor for what it's like, right? And
yeah,
I don't know. So like, but I say that to say, don't get stuck. And we did, and we tried to do a Lego curriculum. We did other things, right? Like, and we used airsoft, as like you've mentioned before in your podcast. That was my PE. Airsoft was
yeah,
like
exactly.
the way I
Yeah.
did PE.
Our school was
And
very untraditional at the end.
right
Like, it
at
it
the end, it
became
was
there was
like,
curriculum, but there was very it was not, yeah, at the start, it was very like, we're just doing, this is the curriculum, it's all from the same company, and then by the
right,
end, it was like, we're doing this company's math, and this company's science books, and this company's this, and that
right,
company's that, right? And then we're designing our
yeah,
own whatever else, and so
right,
it
exactly. And we're
became something that worked for us, and so I appreciate you saying that because I think parents get overwhelmed at the beginning of
Yeah,
because there's so
it's
many
easy.
choices,
Well, and you don't wanna do
right?
it wrong, right?
Right.
Well, there's not a wrong, right? There's you start somewhere, and then you adapt, and you evolve, you evolve and you grow, and what you're learning yourself, and you're changing that, and you're seeing what works with your student. You're customizing the education as you go along. You know, Madison's look different from yours because she had learning challenges that you didn't have. And so we had to figure out, well, how can she capture this information, and it was very
Yeah.
different than the way that you captured information. So I say all that to say, you know, try as best as you can to think outside the box, and then don't sweat it. I guess don't sweat it so hard. Your kids are sponges. They want to learn. If you turn on that learning, if you find out what if you can pursue what their interests are, and it doesn't mean that you don't add in critical things. It just means that you can lean into their interests to give them the energy and the desire to learn. If you build that in them and make and teach them how to be learners, I think that's the most critical part, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, if you can light that fire, um, so that they become lifelong learners, right? And you're lighting that fire so that you're finding their interest, you're stoking it. It's not that you're not adding in things that they don't like, that they need, or that are critical to their learning and their adapting and life skills, but you know you can stoke it so that I think the goal is for them to become lifelong learners. I think that's one of the goals, right?
Yeah.
So um I think that's the best. I think it's one of the best ways you can serve your kids. So that's I guess that's some of the advice I would give, for dads, fathers, husbands. I would say, um, uh, jump in earlier than I did. I would say, be involved as you can be. Like it was really, um, uh, I mean, I was blessed by it all. You know, like honestly, as a kid, I was a math and science guy, especially numbers spoke to me. They still do. That's what I do. I'm an accountant. But through homeschooling, I've become an avid reader, quite honestly, because it didn't matter. Like we watched every single movie ever made of Pride and Prejudice, and it didn't matter how good the movie was. Mom always said the book's better, so I couldn't believe it. I
It
had to
is.
read the book, and sure enough, the book is better. Well, guess what? The book is always better in every single movies, even the movies that I love, like Lone Survivor. I love the movie, but the book is better, right? Like, 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 and I read the book first, thank goodness, right? So like, but it's just the way it is, you know.
Yeah.
Books are better. They can be more detailed. It's different. They're different mediums of communication, right?
Right.
But I say that, and I also say to father, like I would say to fathers, you know, be more involved, be an advocate for your your kids, your wife, what you're doing. One of the one of the important we didn't touch on this, but one of the important things that we learned to do, that I actually learned through going to some of these conferences, was actually a period while we were homeschooling. We were intentional. Mom and I were intentional about going away for a couple of nights. We tried to do it like every quarter, like so every 3 months or so, to a getaway, a couple nights in a hotel, just time for us. But also, but what that did was, I mean, it was important for our marriage, and our relationship. It was an important break for her because the bulk of the responsibility laid on her shoulders, right? And it was also important to get away because it removed her from the environment, right? Like it we couldn't just stay at home because all the concerns and the responsibilities are still, she looks around and they're still there, right? But if we could go to a hotel that was nice, she didn't have to look at the laundry pile or the pile of dishes, or oh, I have to plan dinner for the kids, right? It was like removing some of that and allowing, giving her a break, giving us time to connect as a couple, um, was important for us. And I think important, and we could talk about homeschooling stuff. We could talk about that, and we could talk about direction and where we wanted to go and what's working, what's not working. But you don't have to. You can. It's opportunity to. But I think that's important. So like taking care um, of that and just being involved, being engaged, trying um, to figure out and enter into the world of your kids and their interests so that you can develop those relationships. I think that's ideally we want people to enter into our world, right? But with your kids, I think you need to find out, well, where's their interest lies so you can enter in with them, right? Because you're communicating to them, well, this, you are important to me, I'm entering in with you. you know while you were in school, you enjoyed music and guitar, and like that was just not in my realm or not in my wheelhouse, but it didn't mean that I couldn't, you know listen to you play and just like talk about music, that even though I was very not knowledgeable at all.
Yeah. Well,
But
I
just
think
show interest, right? And like
exactly.
support you, and want to like encourage that and see you develop that, and try, right? Like I was not a musician, I couldn't really get the guitar, I wasn't good with my hands, like, but I could like, show me some stuff, I'll try, I
Yeah.
won't succeed very well, but like I'll just try,
Yeah.
and
I
so
think that that attitude has really gone far in us continuing to have a relationship. It's like to the degree that we do, right? It's like I think a lot of
yeah,
people they have a relationship with their dad, but it's like I see them at the holidays and we play cards and, or I call him
uh-huh,
and I ask him how he is and it's like 5 seconds on the phone and then it's like, here's your mom,
right,
kind of a thing. And I think the difference is that you showed me so much respect when I was in high school and when I was younger of like you were into the things that I was into. And even when you clearly weren't into them, you at least tried, you know?
right,
And now, as an adult, you still do that. The things that I'm interested in, you express an interest and you ask me about them and you ask me about those hobbies and you learn about them and you enter into that world with me.
right.
And I now want to do the same for you. It's like I know more about obstacle course racing than I ever thought I would, right?
Yeah,
I have bought you gear for presents and stuff that
yeah,
I didn't even
yeah,
know what it was. I bought my dad a big set of red balls that hang in the garage
yeah,
somewhere.
yeah.
Um,
For grip
for like finger
for grip
exercising.
training. Yeah,
Yeah, they're
for
grip
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 training,
training. I
and,
tried to get them in blue, guys. I thought it'd be a really funny gift. Um, but they only came in red. So yeah. So anyway, but I think it's interesting because I think that that has it's definitely shaped the relationship that we have today. And I would argue
yeah,
that I think we have a good relationship
yeah,
because we both, I think, mutually can just meet in a place where it's like, maybe your thing isn't totally my thing, but I at least want to understand and I'm willing to have
R
a conversation and
right.
learn about it because you showed me that respect when I was young, and now I understand what you were doing and I want to reciprocate, right? And that
Well,
also has gone
cool.
far in other relationships that I have. So,
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. That's thank
yeah.
you.
Well,
Um,
I love you, Dad.
I love
I
you,
thank you
and,
for coming on the show. This has
oh,
been awesome.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me and letting me just give my 2 cents, I guess.
No, I think it's important because,
So,
you know, I'm meeting more homeschool people and hearing their stories and hearing about their dad's involvement, and then also meeting people who are thinking about homeschooling and they're wanting to be involved in their sons' lives. And like, I don't know,
yeah,
I felt like it was an important conversation to have because I felt
yeah,
like your role in my homeschool education was different than most people's. And
yeah,
so, and I wanted it to be, if anything else, people, what I want you to get out of this is hopefully an encouragement to like just like my dad said, be an advocate for
yeah,
your kids' education, for if you're not a parent, for kids in your life
yeah.
education, um
One of the things I would say too for dads, it's we do things different. We um, and it's okay. Like I think I told Sue mom this when we kind of were transitioning to me leading your education. I said, well, it's going to look different, right? It's not going to look how you necessarily want it to look. Okay, you're gonna help me out a lot, lesson planning, but the way it's going to get implemented is probably going to look completely different from where you think how you would implement it, right? And that's okay. Dads do things different. It's not right or wrong. It's different, and that's okay. Dads, it's important. That's important too. Like the way that you do things is important. It has value. It can be. It's meaningful, and it can look different. It doesn't even have to look like other dads. It can be your style, and that's okay. And just embrace it, um, and work with it. And use that. And I think that's okay. Like I think that's a good thing.
yeah.
It brings diversity. It brings diversity of thought and just difference that kids can see. Oh well, it doesn't always have to be like this. It can be like this, and like it's okay that mom does it different from dad, and we're still gonna we may get to the same place, but we may take a different circuitous route. It's like like, but okay, it's still. It might be harder. It might be funner. It might. I don't know. It's gonna look different, but we can still accomplish a lot. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I want to leave on this one. I've been having memories pop up in my head,
Okay.
and I was gonna ask you like your favorite homeschool memory, and but I feel like maybe
We've
I'm off.
touched on
I
some
feel like
other memories.
homeschool. I feel like airsoft was kind of the key thing, but I
Yeah.
but I had this other memory come to my mind
Uh-huh.
that I was like, this is also I think really fun. When I was a kid, my birthday parties were very like themed. Um, and so one year we did like marshmallow guns in the backyard and I
Uh-huh.
built them all and like but that's so that one was important. But the second one
Right.
was that I did a pirate themed birthday party
Oh,
and we
yeah.
all dressed as pirates
Oh,
and
yeah.
you showed up as a pirate and I think that like
We had a pirate
we
flag flying out of
it
the
w
roof of our
it
house.
was so much fun, like, you
Yeah.
helped transform this whole house into a pirate ship, and
Yeah. We put a
so
plank off the back. We have well, yeah,
exactly, there's a
we
cliff
put a
off the back
walk
of
the
our
plank.
yard.
Yeah.
Yeah, people could walk the
We
plank, yeah, people weren't walking the plank, but we could if we wanted to,
yeah.
um, so I just think memories like that are just, like, super fun and important and,
Yeah. Do you
that
remember
kinda thing.
was it the pirate birthday that we had the jello eating contest?
Yes, yeah, so That
What
was
did someone,
I
like, slurp down their fake
I did.
mustache?
I ate my mustache. So this birthday, we in addition to only like we invited everyone to dress like pirates, but then we also bought a bunch of like fake mustaches and sideburns and like all
And
this stuff,
beards and yeah,
beards and all this stuff that were
yeah,
just like stick on, very temporary. We had swords for everybody, eye
yep,
patches, bandanas, like the whole,
the
shebang
whole 9
basically.
yards, yeah, we
And
went
yeah,
all
and
out,
then we did all these games that were like pirate themed games, but
yep.
one of them was Jello slurping, which I guess is not really a pirate themed game, but I don't know, we made it somehow pirate
We made
themed.
it we called it something that made it piratey,
Yeah. Yeah, and, but yeah, I slurped up my mustache. Like, I started and I had a mustache, and I ended and I did not have a mustache, so it's probably still kicking around down there all these years later, but oh well.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, that was a lot of fun, yeah.
Anyway,
So
this has been
yeah,
a blast, and thank you again for doing this
cool.
because I think it's important, and a lot of people have been asking to hear from parents, so
Cool, good. Well, I'm happy to do this, and thank you for inviting me on, and, I just yeah, so I just I wish the best, uh, for this and the audience that hears it.
yeah. Well, thank you again, and for all of you guys listening, watching, consuming, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to hit me up with if you've got homeschool stories or you you want to tell me who else you want to see on the show or you got questions that you want to answer or whatever, you can hit me up. There's two ways you can do it. You can either email me, it's at exhsclub@gmail.com, or you can hit me up on, I think I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. It's at exhsclub. Yeah, either of those places, you can get a hold of me. This has been fun. And until next week, we'll see ya. All right. Peace.